admitting everyone. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be getting started very shortly. This is the final community meeting for the VFW Parkway Providence Highway Corridor Action Plan. We'll be getting started probably around 7:05, but we just want to wait a little bit for some more folks to join us. We had a lot of people who signed up to be here today, so we want to make sure that as many folks are here before we get started. So in the meantime, if you have any questions about the meeting tonight, please feel free to post those in the chat. We will be using the chat to gather questions for Q&A later. So during the meeting, if you have any questions, please feel free to post those in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them. But in the meantime, feel free to hang out and hang tight until we get started. Thanks so much. Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is the final community meeting for the VFW Parkway Providence Highway Corridor Action Plan. We're very grateful that you have joined us today. We will be getting started shortly. During the meeting, we will be using the chat to collect questions for a Q&A. So please feel free to post questions in the chat during the meeting. To find the chat, you will just need to look, if you're on your computer, at the bottom of your Zoom window, and the chat button is in the middle. It looks kind of like a little text bubble, and underneath it says the word chat. If you are on your iPad, it is actually located at the top of your screen. So again, we'll be getting started shortly. In the meantime, please feel free to post any question you have about the meeting in the chat, and hang tight. Thanks so much.
Christian, why don't we get started?
Great. It's all yours.
Thank you. Hold on. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy Rosenberger, the Planning Director for the Town of Dedham, and I want to welcome everyone here on this rainy, but I do see rainbows out my window, so that is a great sign for tonight. It's a great welcoming sign, so thankfully, and during this lull. And of course, as Christian meant, we're calling this the final community meeting, but I definitely don't want to say this is the final because we envision this process continuing. We still have a lot more work to do, but this will be the final community meeting of this what we call this visioning concept corridor action plan. And we'll talk later where we're going from here. But first, the big goal tonight is to discuss some concepts with you and what we heard from you at our last meeting. And so again, thank you all for taking the time to join us. This is a unique collaboration between two municipalities, the town of Dedham and the city of Boston. And ultimately, we're here to develop a 21st century transit vision and plan for all along this corridor. And so before we get started, just want to run through a couple procedural things for all of us. We're all Zoom experts, but I definitely want to go through them again. So if you can, next slide, Christian. Oh, never mind. Because we're all experts, I think we all know the instructions. I think the main thing is let's all be respectful to everyone. The chat is open today, so I encourage everyone to be respectful and point in and provide great feedback to us, and we'll be managing that. And during the Q&A portions, we'll be unmuting if you need to talk, but we definitely, due to the size of the crowd we have tonight, and I'm sure it's going to grow, we want to utilize the chat for the most part for conversation. So please, utilize that. That's at the bottom of your screen. And then when we get to Q&A, you can use the raise the hand function, which again is at the bottom of your screen. And so let's kick it off with a little bit of a mixer here. So we have an icebreaker. If folks want to put in the chat just for good measure and stir things up, what was last time you went to the corridor? What did you do? Nice open-ended question. So we'll give that a minute or two. So if folks want to elaborate on what they're doing, I'm guessing hopefully a lot of people were shopping.
I'm seeing some driving. Someone shopped at Lowe's, driving to the Dedham Mall, going to work.
I heard there was a sale there, so that's probably good.
Lots of driving. Biked to a doctor's appointment. Lots of driving, lots of shopping, all kinds of different shopping. See Dedham Mall. Someone said, I actually walked.
Excellent. Hopefully
Stop
not today.
shop. Millennium Park. Awesome. Feel free to keep sharing what you did the last time you went to the corridor in the chat, but we will go on to the beginning of the presentation.
Thank you, Christian. Oh, I realize
You're
the
in the
guidelines
virtual
are after. And we already went through these. And of course, technical difficulties, if you have it, feel free to contact us via the chat box if you're having issues trying to find, if you're not being able to chat or unmute, obviously you'll be able to chat. But nonetheless, and so the next slide, we just want to let everyone know that we're recording this because we are going to we'll be putting this on our project page, and Christian will be putting the link in for our project page. But there's obviously folks, sometimes they can't be with us, and we want you to share this with your neighbors, residents, business owners, and stakeholders if they couldn't make it tonight, because there's a lot to discuss, and we feel there's a lot of great things that we want to share with the community. So we're going to record that. So thank you, Christian. And so, of course, getting to tonight's agenda. So we're going to go through the welcome and introductions next. I'm going to give a little recap of where, what's this, why are we here? What's this plan all about? What we heard from you at our last community meeting. And then the real, meat and potatoes of tonight is the long-term conceptual improvements that we're going to present to you. And long-term, we made, probably it'll take up to 10 years, maybe, hopefully sooner, 5 years, if we can get the funding. And then we'll take a pause right there, and we'll have a Q&A and discuss those long-term improvements. And then ultimately, and we heard this at the last community meeting, all right, long-term improvements are great. What are we going to do in the short term? Because there are an abundance of issues that need to be discussed and remedied. So we'll talk about those. What can we do in this short term, meaning between now and say 5 years, or even now and 2 years? And we'll have a discussion on that again. And lastly, where do we go from here? And we'll talk about that. So thank you, Christian. And so I just want to give a brief thank you to our technical team. This is, we've been meeting diligently and expeditiously since really October, and since the spring, meeting every week to put all these concepts together for you to let us know what you think about where we're heading with this vision and what we've heard from you. So from the town of Dedham, I'm representing the town of Dedham tonight from the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Transportation planner Sam Devine is with us. If you just folks just want to wave their hands. We also have our great consultant team from Central Transportation Planning staff. We have Mark Abbott and Seth Asante. And also joining us from Metropolitan Area Planning Council, we have Travis Pollock and Christian Brandt. And so thank you all. And I just want to recognize, and they're the behind the scenes folks that helped get this going and have put this great presentation and these concepts together for you. And so before we go to the next slide, I definitely want to thank, if you can go back real quick, Christian. Of course, I want to thank our elected officials, Senator Mike Rush and Representatives Paul McMurtry and Ed Coppinger. We wouldn't be here without their funding that they secured for this endeavor. So a whole host of gratitude for that, and bringing the community together to talk about what can we do with this corridor and how can we remake this corridor for all. And so I believe they're on the horn tonight. And again, thank you for joining us, representatives and Senator. Thank you. And so next slide, Christian. So as we always do at our meetings, we have a couple polling questions. We did this back at our March one, but we want to make sure our community engagement efforts are being effective. So by taking this poll, it's not mandatory, but we please encourage you to participate in this poll, which Christian will pop up in a second. Please fill it out, and so we can make sure we're doing the best job to ensure we're getting stakeholders to these meetings.
All right, so you should see a poll pop up on your screen right now. If you aren't seeing it, it's possible that the poll has appeared behind your Zoom window. Sometimes that happens, so you will need to minimize your Zoom window in order to view it. All right, so I'm seeing a good chunk of folks have responded, so we're going to leave it open a little bit longer. All right. I am going to share the results. So looks like the majority of folks who are joining us are from Dedham, with a good chunk from West Roxbury and a significant portion from Roslindale. I'm seeing a bunch of folks from Roslindale sharing in the chat. Majority of folks who've joined us are between the ages of 50 and 64. Pretty equal amount are women and men. And the majority of folks who are joining us identify as white. Most people typically drive through the corridor by move through the corridor by driving. I sort of answered that question. And most people heard about this from social media. So thank you so much for answering those questions for us.
Thank you, everyone. So why are we here, of course? And so this might be for folks that are new, thank you for joining us. And from folks in March that attended our first community meeting, thank you for coming again. But I just wanted to reiterate what this corridor plan is all about. And you'll see a graphic on the right. This is an action plan for what we're calling the VFW Providence Highway Corridor, all the way from the Marine Rotary, which is I guess that kind of a rotary and as a gateway to Dedham to the south, all the way up about almost 2 miles north to the intersection of VFW Bridge and Spring Street intersection. So that's and it's the roadway in between. That's the scope of our project. And again, this is boiled down to 2 points: developing an action plan to transform this car-centric corridor into a route for everyone and meet the needs of local residents, local businesses, bicyclists, pedestrians, transit riders, as well as motorists. And ultimately come up with short and long-term recommendations, which we're talking about tonight, for safe access to shops, schools, neighborhoods, transit, and recreational areas, including the Charles River and Mother Brook. And I will note that you'll notice that nice body of water that is so essential to our lives right along to the west of this corridor. That's the Charles River, somewhat secluded, but very visible and very prominent. And I saw that someone was canoeing recently, so that was great. So there's so many ways to utilize this corridor. And so we're thankful that there are actually recreational opportunities here too. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So this is really why we're here in a nutshell. And if you could, next slide, please, Christian. And so I just want to give a brief timeline of where, what this was all about. We began this back in October with a kickoff. A lot of the fall and into the early winter was a lot of data gathering. You probably saw we were taking traffic counts out there, collecting speed data. So a lot of that led up to our March community meeting. There was a lot of data gathering that we needed to present to you, the community, to understand what's this quarter all about. I think we all, no surprise, I think a lot of folks understand the issues and opportunities of the quarter, more issues than opportunities. But nonetheless, we wanted to actually get some data to go along with that. And ultimately, we had our meeting in March to discuss the needs assessment. And so since then, we've been developing concepts, which we have tonight. Our consultant team, while they drew out these concepts, they had to test them too. And in addition to meet with a number of city and state agencies that we've been working with, and I saw someone mention DCR, been working with MassDOT, our elected officials, MBTA, and everyone in between to test out these concepts and fine tune them before we present them to you. And so we spent a good chunk of portion doing that because no surprise, these are complicated. This is a complicated roadway and definitely complicated intersections. And then ultimately we hope to finalize this by, I think it says June 2021 twice, but that would be July. We hope to wrap this up by the end of July with a final report, and we'll talk about those next steps. But before we have that final report, we're here to talk with you about some of these concepts and refine as necessary. So if you could, next slide, Christian. And so I just want to, we've summarized the many points of feedback from you that we got this from the survey conducted in early 2021. We had, I believe, roughly 1,300 responses. And in our March community meeting where we had, I believe, somewhere between 150 and 200 people. So we've had an abundance of feedback, and it's been great. It makes our lives much easier when we hear from you. And what's come out through all that feedback is clear strengths and identity, opportunities and needs that we're presenting here. And so we appreciate your turnout to get to this. So the corridor strengths, there's a lot of opportunity for multimodal transportation. And by that, I mean, this is a very wide roadway and definitely in the Dedham section, more the Boston section. And by being wide means, and what we've heard, there's opportunity for many different forms of transportation, from canoeing to biking to walking, to skateboarding, to bus riding, and obviously vehicles. So there's great opportunity to accommodate everyone for the most part of this corridor. And there's many opportunities to make best use of our recreational resources. This roadway is blessed to have the natural resource that we talked about, the Charles River, and actually some public lands that are adjacent to this to add even more opportunities for recreation. And as I'm sure everyone found during COVID, we don't have enough opportunities to get out and enjoy our great natural environment. So I think COVID has definitely heightened the idea that we need more opportunities, and this corridor is a great representation of opportunities for more recreation needs. It's almost 2 miles, and think of the exercise opportunities that presents if they were safe. And I think we'll present some very safe accommodations for you for the long term. And again, comes with that economic opportunities. There's a lot of folks that live and work on this corridor, and it's not exactly the safest. So there's opportunity to improve that. Opportunities to improve a lot of things, and in addition to the quality of life of neighborhoods, we know there's a lot of congestion, safety issued with this roadway. So there's opportunity to improve that. And lastly, transform this roadway. Huge blank slate. This was constructed in the 50s and 60s, and it's been a long time coming. So we feel there's a wide swath of opportunity here. So those were the strengths, and these were the things that filtered out from all these conversations. Next slide, please, Christian. And so the weaknesses, these are probably no surprise. Very car-centric corridor. Minimal use of existing recreational open space resources. I just talked about that. Lack of pedestrian and bicycle facilities. It's a wide roadway. Well, that's a good thing. It's also not being utilized fully for pedestrians and bicycles. It's in some places there's almost 6 lanes of roadway, and And lastly, it's and I think we all, no surprise, agree that it's unwelcoming streetscape and landscape. Next slide, please, Christian. And lastly, so this is ultimately what we came up with: the corridor needs, transform the corridor into a route for all users. This is what we heard from you and also from our team. Upgrade the corridor infrastructure to improve safety. I believe we've shown some previous diagrams that showed some of these intersections. There's an abundance of crashes and accidents, and that's not good. And we want to do our best to fix some of that. As we said, this was designed in the 50s and 60s, not for 21st century transportation. Redesign the roadway to calm traffic and reduce speeds, provide welcoming streetscape to enhance placemaking and presence that's attractive to all modes, and provide connections to economic opportunities and recreational areas. So that's in a nutshell. That was the real consolidation of all that we've heard. We heard a lot, and we wanted to. This is the best, 5 main points that really struck us that came out from all of that conversation. Thanks to you. And so with that, if we can go to the next slide, Christian. And for the good part of the presentation, talking about the long and short-term concepts, putting all that together, we have our points and our goals and aspirations, but what does that look like? And so I'm going to hand it over to Seth Asante from CTPS. He's our consultant. But before that, before I hand it to Seth again, it looks like folks are definitely using the chat, and thank you. And please continue to do that. We'll try to keep up with your questions and comments, and feel free to populate that while we go through this presentation. We will pause at the end again of both the long and the short-term concepts and take a breather. Christian will be trying to pick out the common questions, and hopefully we can probably go through them all if time allows. And also, if folks want to actually request to be unmuted to talk, we're open to that, but we definitely say, please use the chat first, and if you want to talk, that's fine. And so with that, without further ado, Seth, if you could take it away. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeremy and Christian. Good evening. My name is Seth Asante, and I'm a transportation planner at the Central Transportation Planning Staff, the agency that is conducting the technical analysis for this study. The purpose of today's presentation is to share with you the long and short-term improvement concepts that we developed to transform the corridor into a route for all users, and to get your feedback. The character and context of the Providence Highway and the VFW Parkway varies along this corridor. To incorporate this character and context into the concept development, we divided the corridor into 3 segments. The first segment is the Providence Highway Segment 1, which extends from the Marine Rotary to the Dedham driveway intersection. This segment is shown in the dark green color to the south of the corridor. The second segment is the Providence Highway Segment 2, which extends between the Dedham driveway intersection and the U-turn intersection, and is shown in the light green color. The third segment is the VFW Parkway segment in the Boston side. It extends from the U-turn intersection to the Spring Street intersection in Boston, and is shown in the yellow color. Next slide, please. We have many concepts to present to you today. Therefore, the first part of the presentation, I'll focus on the long-term concepts, and this will be followed by comments and feedback, as Jeremy mentioned. We also encourage you to use the chat function and raise hand tool to provide comment and feedback for us. In the second part, I'll focus on the short-term improvement concept, and then I'll also pause after that for comments and feedback. For both the long-term and short-term improvement concepts, I will be starting from the Marine Rotary and then describe the concepts sequentially, heading off through the corridor. The long-term concepts are aimed at transforming the corridor into a route for all users and a welcoming streetscape that is attractive to all modes that will use the corridor. Next slide. We developed two concepts for the Marine Rotary. The first is a two-lane runabout, shown here. The runabout has a smaller inscribed circle to slow down traffic to around 20 to 25 miles per hour. The smaller size also provide more space to accommodate pedestrian and bicycle at the intersection. Also, the runabout concept streamlined traffic at the intersection and remove all the confusion that is associated with the signalized rotary that currently exists. It is expected that this concept will improve safety. However, our analysis indicated that the runabout concept will not perform well during the PM peak period due to the high volume of traffic. Next slide. The second concept for the Marine Rotary is a signalized intersection. The signalized intersection is also much smaller than the signalized rotary currently existing at the location, and it saves much space for pedestrian and bicycle accommodation. This concept also simplifies traffic flow through the intersection and provides more safe crossing areas and is more pedestrian friendly. Our analysis indicated that the signalized intersection will perform satisfactorily during the AM and PM peak periods. Next slide. Now we move on to the Providence Highway Segment 1, which is shown in the dark green color. The existing roadway has 4 travel lanes, excuse me, 2 in each direction, sidewalk and shoulders, and a median. It also has no accommodation for bicycles. We developed 2 concepts for the Providence Highway Segment 1. In Concept 1, we modified the existing roadway cross-section to create 4-lane roadway, 2 in each direction. This concept also has a shoulder and a space for pedestrian and bicycle accommodation on either side of the Providence Highway. There is also a median with trees. The space for the pedestrian and bicycle could be used as a shared use path or separate them into sidewalk and bike lane. Next slide. This is Concept 2 for the Providence Highway Segment 1, which is also similar to Concept 1, except that in Concept 1, we removed the shoulder in Concept 1 and replaced it with a tree buffer to narrow the roadway cross-section in order to calm traffic and also reduce vehicular speeds. The tree buffer also separates pedestrian and bicycles from vehicular travel lanes. Next slide. This is the concept that we developed for the Dedham Mall driveway intersection. Here we remove the carriage road in the long-term improvement concept. The carriage road makes pedestrian and bicycle crossing very difficult and unsafe. This concept puts all the traffic on Providence Highway, and it simplifies traffic movement at the intersection, adds crosswalk, wheelchair ramps, and space to accommodate bicycles and pedestrians. Next slide. So now we move on to Providence Highway Segment 2. This segment is very wide. The existing roadway currently has 6 travel lanes, wide shoulders, and it is not pedestrian and bicycle friendly. The existing cross-section is shown at the top of the slide. We developed also 2 concepts for the Providence Highway Segment 2. In Concept 1, we created a 4-lane road with also space for accommodating pedestrian and bicycle on either side of the roadway. This concept also has 3 buffers and shoulders to separate the pedestrian and bicycles from vehicular traffic. Overall, the transformation makes the roadway pedestrian and bicycle friendly and is also expected to calm traffic and reduce speeds. Next slide. This is the concept 2 for the Providence Highway Segment 2. And it's also similar to concept 1. The main difference is that the shoulder in concept 1 is eliminated to further narrow the roadway with calm traffic and make it more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. And again, the space for pedestrian and bicycles also can be a shared use path or can be separate pedestrian sidewalk and bicycle lane. Next slide. This is the plan view of the concept for the Providence Highway Segment 2. As I mentioned earlier, in the long-term improvement concept, we removed the carriage roadway. We also introduced a new signalized intersection midway between the mall driveway and the U-turn intersection. So within the segment, we have 3 signalized intersections. This is to further enhance access and egress from the Dedham Mall, provide more crossing opportunities for pedestrians and bicycles, calm traffic, and reduce speeds. All the 3 intersections in the segment also provide access to and from the mall, and also more crossing opportunities and space for pedestrians and bicycles. Next slide. This is the concept that we developed for the U-turn intersection. We converted it into a signalized T intersection with connection to the mall internal road system. This concept also puts all the traffic on the Providence Highway or VFW Parkway. Crosswalks are provided to connect to the pedestrian and bicycle facilities. It also includes bus stop locations for the Route 52 bus service. The bus stops are shown in the yellow small circles. Next slide. Now we move on to the VFW Parkway segment in the Boston section. Here, the existing roadway has sidewalks, shoulders, and is also a 4-lane roadway with 2 lanes in each direction. However, there are no bike facilities in this section. The concept that we developed for this segment has 2 travel lanes in each direction, pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and also a 6-foot tree buffer in each direction, and as well as a median. We also propose opening the median at 8th Street and signalizing the intersection to allow for turn maneuvers. by opening the median at A Street and allowing 10 maneuvers. This will further reduce the circuitous traffic circulation in the segment, as well as reducing congestion at the Spring Street intersection. Additional improvements include adding 3 bus stops in this segment for the Route 52 bus service. Next slide. This is the plan view of the long-term improvement concept for the VFW Parkway that I just described. And it shows the bus stop locations, which is shown in the yellow circles. Also, the proposed signalized intersection at A Street to enhance 10 maneuvers, and also a mid-block crossing in the vicinity of the McDonald's restaurant. Next slide. Okay, so this ends the long-term improvements. So this long-term improvement, as I mentioned, is for transforming the corridor into a route for all users. And at this juncture, I'm going to pause here and allow your feedback and comments on the long-term concept. We also encourage you to use the chat functions and the raise hand feature to provide your comments.
Seth, thank you for that. I just want to, Christian, if I may interject. So I think you'll notice that there, while we had a concept for the Marine Rotary, there wasn't one for the VFW Spring Street intersection to the north in West Roxbury or Boston. And we discussed this at the first meeting that Mass DOT, the state agency that regulates our highways, has been conducting, and I believe they have what is known as a 25% design concept for that intersection. So for this process, realizing that Mass DOT was already advancing a design, we did not take that, and that was not part of our scope of work. The thing to note is that's been that's in the queue for funding much later than we anticipated. So now it's been pushed back to I believe late 2020s. And one of the things that came out of that is there's not an easy, it's a tough nut to crack, that intersection. And I think some of the concepts that you've seen here, and one of the tough is that turn, that left-hand turn going north at that Spring Street intersection is it's as everyone knows, it's very backed up. And so we think some of what we've proposed as part of this process will alleviate that by adding a few more stoplights will actually reduce that queuing. And not create hopefully those log jams that are developing and impacting the whole intersection at Spring Street. So I just wanted to kind of give that as a background about that intersection to folks, that we haven't forgot about you, but we think what we've presented through this will actually provide some benefit to that state design, and might actually hopefully cause the state to maybe take another look, and maybe it can jump the queue and get funding sooner. So I just wanted to note that. And again, for folks, this is our first touch at these concepts. This isn't the final design. This is the first phase. The next phase would be securing more funding to analyze these even further, and solidify them for eventual construction. So we just wanted to get the vision and the overarching concepts of what we think this corridor should work and operate like. So I'll hand it to Christian. I don't know if you have specific questions. I saw we have a very active chat, so thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, everybody. So we do have a really active chat, which I expected no less. And I have to say, most of the chat comments are actually statements in support or statements of concern about some of the things that we've been discussing. So I'm going to try and parse through some of these to get to some questions. If I don't get to your question, it is likely just because we really have a limited amount of time here today. So I'm going to try my best. All right, so one of the there's a lot of questions about the two different Providence Highway first section concepts. And so one was, if you went with a signalized intersection and gained that space on Providence Highway Section 1, why wouldn't you push the bike lane and sidewalk away from the road a bit?
Can we go to that slide if you don't mind, Christian?
Absolutely.
I believe it's right. Oh, go back. One more. Forward. Keep going. One more. Nope, back the other way.
It's fine.
One more. One more. Sorry, right there.
Okay.
I think that's this is probably a good visual. And I don't know if Seth, if you want to handle this.
Okay.
And this is in
Okay.
regards, can the bike lane shift and why did we put it here? If I correct.
Yeah. Okay. So these are concepts. There is a next step that will do an actual survey and come out with a 25%. So where we have it is not fixed. It will be determined during the functional design. And a lot of input are going to go into these concepts that we have developed, which will be advanced to the 25% design. So we could move the sidewalks and bike lane from the to get away from the roadway. But I want to emphasize that there is still much more freedom to play with these concepts.
I think that's the great thing about, and especially this section, as I alluded to earlier, this is a very wide right of way. And the right of way, we mean this is the area that the state owns, and we can program for multiple uses. And I believe it stretches up to 120 feet. Hopefully, I'm not exaggerating that number, Seth. But there's home for everyone here, which is the great thing. And I noticed in some chats, some folks reference, have we reached out to the business owners and property owners along here? And yes, we have. We've had some sit downs with them because obviously, changing this carriage road, I guess we could call it a carriage road, has impacts to them and access to their intersections. But at the same time, they want safe, they want all the patrons, employees to be able to get to their businesses in a safe manner. And by providing these, all these signalized intersections, getting rid of that, some of these, these basically raceways that are kind of free-for-alls, it provides the safety that they want and makes it more desirable to come here. And I think providing all these amenities makes it more desirable to come here. So thus far, those conversations have gone great. And we'll continue to work with all these property owners to ensure that their needs are addressed and the issues aren't negatively impacting them.
So a lot of folks commented about how much they liked the added trees and greenery in the concepts. But one question we got a couple of times was whether or not it was possible to put the island green space, or at least increase the green space between the bike and pedestrian lanes and the roadway, and whether or not it would be possible to do that along the length of the corridor.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the character of the Providence Highway and VFW Parkway varies along the corridor. For Providence Highway Segment 1, the right of way is about 84 feet. When you move to the Providence Highway Segment 2, it's about 114 feet. So we have more room to play with and move the sidewalk or bike lane out of the travel lane. So yeah, that is possible, but it's not possible for, let's say, Providence Highway Segment 1 or in the Boston VFW Parkway segment where you have the businesses close to the roadway. So depending on the section, we can make some adjustment to move the sidewalk and bike lanes away from the travel lanes.
Great, thanks, Seth. We got a couple of questions about the eliminating the U-turn at the car wash. And most of these were just concerned about how eliminating the U-turn might aggravate existing conditions on the Bridge Street, and so folks are wondering what the impact of eliminating that would be on things like the level of surface and congestion in that area.
I'll let Seth handle that one.
Okay. So our analysis,
Back one.
okay. Yeah. So we perform analysis, and our analysis indicated that if you open the median at A Street to allow 10 maneuvers, it cannot prevent all this traffic having to go to the U-turn intersection to turn around and go north. And also people on the northbound direction to head back to Spring Street and also make a U-turn to go south. As you have seen, within the Providence Highway segment 2, we have 3 signalized intersections in that area. So all this additional intersection and openings actually helps reduce the congestion at the Spring Street intersection.
Yeah, I might add too, also where the existing U-turn is, where we're proposing a signal, we wouldn't be eliminating possible U-turns occurring there. So they still would be allowed. It's just that we're eliminating those slip ramp type of U-turn maneuvers that are occurring today.
Awesome, thank you. Another question that we received a couple of sort of versions of was a question about the service roads or the carriage roads. So some folks are wondering if removing the service road seems like it might add some roadway friction to the main roadway, and feeling like the service road makes the corridor more drivable now. So Seth, would you be willing to speak a little bit to the rationale for removing the carriage roads?
Yeah, the carriage road currently is for making U-turns and also access to the mall. With the carriage roadway, which has 2 travel lanes heading northbound, with the carriage road and the 4 lanes on the main roadway, cannot give you 6 lanes in the segment. And with 6 lanes, it makes a pedestrian and bicycle crossing very difficult in the segment. Also, the carriage road doesn't carry much traffic. It has low volumes and 2 travel lanes. So by putting all the traffic on Providence Highway, actually makes the roadway pedestrian and bicycle friendly and improve the quality and also reduce the travel speeds along the segment and calm traffic too.
Great, so Seth, that actually brings me to my next question, and that is, will speed limits be changed in the corridor?
Yeah, actually, all the improvements that we presented for the long-term measure were aimed at reducing speeds. As you saw, we reduced the travel lanes and also took the shoulders away to narrow the roadway to calm traffic. We also added 2 signalized intersections within the corridor to slow down traffic and also improve pedestrian safety along the corridor. So yes, we designed the improvement concept to reduce speed of travel within the corridor.
Great, so there are of course a bunch of other questions, but there was one that was posted relatively recently that got a lot of people wondering the same thing, and that was someone noticed that they hadn't seen very much about increasing access to or taking advantage of the Charles River or the surrounding recreational amenities. And so I'm wondering if somebody from the technical team, whether that's
I can take that.
someone else. Great, thank you.
And I think we talked about this, and what a great resource we have. And I mean, this image shows it right here, and you actually see some swaths of green in there that actually show, land that is right off the corridor. So for reference, I'm talking the land to the, you're looking to the above the Providence Highway, which is actually the west. And so we talked about that. There are some public lands that Dedham owns actually here right across from Chick-fil-A, and I believe the rental storage of the town of Dedham actually just acquired a little under 8 acres of space that's actually, potentially usable there. There's a lot of ledge, but there are some flat areas opening up potential access to recreational opportunities. The Army Corps of Engineers, who we've been coordinating with through this effort, owns a lot of property as you get closer to Dedham. And then when you hit basically where the pavement starts to the left of the roadway or to the west in Boston, a lot of that is there's not a whole lot of public access. But we talked about through this initiative to, one of the endeavors is to not just think about this roadway, but to think about recreational opportunities that I just talked about. And so I'm confident that we're going to be able to secure some additional funding to take a look at a feasibility of providing more recreational opportunities along the Charles and some of these areas that I just referenced. We don't have that yet, but there's overarching demand to provide more opportunities for recreation. And I think by the town acquiring that land, it really opens up the gate to provide these opportunities. And so and that's, kind of getting ahead of me in the next steps, but I envision that in the short term that we'll be conducting a feasibility analysis of providing more recreation opportunities in addition to the bicycle and pedestrian amenities that we're talking about tonight. So lots of opportunity for more recreation. So we heard you.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I think we have time for 2 more questions. So the next one I think is for you, Seth. Sort of a general concern about what will happen with heavy traffic going through the area as it relates to traffic calming measures. The person who asked this question is mentioned that there's currently no alternatives to get from Southwest Boston to Southwest Boston from 95 except through residential streets. And so they're wondering what the impact of the traffic calming measures will be on heavier traffic, which I'm assuming they mean by larger trucks and semis and things like that.
Okay, I expect some heavier traffic to serve the businesses like the mall and other businesses in the area. We did have the track volumes when we did the data collection. And we also have the tracks in our model. We included all of this, but our analysis indicated that the existing and future volumes is not going to differ very much. So we don't expect much, although there will be heavier traffic, we don't expect much traffic over the current level that we have.
Great, and actually, Seth, that kind of answered my next question, which was, there's been a couple of questions about traffic volume. So it sounds like by your estimate, you're not expecting a significant increase
in the future.
In the future, does that include expectations about impending development?
Yeah, it's all considered in the model that we used.
Great. So I think I know that there are many other questions that folks asked, so I really appreciate everybody posting their questions in the chat. Whether or not we were able to get to yours tonight, we will be recording these questions and using them to further refine the recommendations and concepts that we're presenting to you today. So I really appreciate everybody taking the time to share their thoughts and questions in the chat. I think we do need to move on to the short-term concepts, and I think in some cases the short-term presentation that Seth is going to give might answer some of your questions that you posted in the chat that we may not have gotten to.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. So, and Christian. So obviously, as Jeremy mentioned, the long-term concepts are going to take some time to implement. And because of that, we created short-term improvement concepts that use or modify the existing roadway features to improve safety and also create space for accommodating pedestrian and bicycle. As I mentioned, I will describe the short-term improvement starting from the Marine Rotary and then head north through the corridor. Next slide. For the Marine Rotary, the short-term improvements include adding more crosswalk to make it easier and safer for pedestrian and bicycle to cross at the Rotary. Also, shortening the crosswalk distances to improve safety for pedestrian. And as you can see in the slide, we have created more crosswalk in the Rotary to help pedestrian to cross safely and also shorten the distances that you have to cross. We did this and analyzed the whole intersection again. And by changing the crosswalk distances and also moving them to make it safer will not impact much traffic movement at the Rotary. Also, the pedestrian and bicycle space could be separate or be used as a shared use path. The improvements also include installing accessible pedestrian signals and countdown timers to facilitate crossing. We also propose upgrading the wheelchair ramps to MassDOT standards and retiming the signals to reduce congestion and also pedestrian wait times, and adding more signs to clarify turn maneuvers at the signalized Rotary. Next slide. For the Providence Highway Segment 1, the short-term improvement include upgrading the sidewalk and wheelchair ramp to MassDOT standards. Also reducing the width of the travel lanes to calm traffic, and then converting the 10-foot shoulders that currently exist in the segment into separated bicycle lanes with physical barriers separating the bicycle lanes from vehicular traffic. The short-term improvement also include adding signs to alert motorists of the presence of pedestrian and bicycles in the segment and improving the street lighting. Next slide. At the Dedham Mall driveway intersection, the short-term improvements include also upgrading sidewalk. Currently, there are no crosswalk at the intersection. So the short-term improvements include upgrading the sidewalk and wheelchair ramps to MassDOT standards, adding crosswalk and accessible pedestrian signals at the intersection to make it safer for pedestrians, and also including the installation of bicycle detection and extending the bicycle lanes through the intersection safely. And additionally, improving the adding more signs and pavement markings to alert motorists of the presence of pedestrian and bicycles. Next slide. For the Providence Highway Segment 2, the short-term improvement also deals with poor sidewalk and wheelchair ramps and bike lanes. We propose upgrading the poor sidewalk and wheelchair ramps, also reducing the lane widths to calm traffic, and also converting the 10-foot shoulders on the left side or the west side of the roadway into a bicycle lane, and to the right, taking one lane off the carriage road and converting it into a separated bicycle lane with physical barrier separating the bicycle lane from vehicular traffic, and adding more crosswalk in the vicinity to facilitate pedestrian crossing. And the short-term improvement concept is shown at the bottom of the slide. Next slide. For the U-turn intersection, the short-term improvements include upgrading sidewalk and wheelchair ramps, also adding a crosswalk at the intersection to help pedestrians to cross, and also connect the bicycle lanes and also connect the bicycle lanes in the segment. We are also recommending additional signs to alert motorists of the presence of pedestrian and bicycle. Another improvement that we have in this segment, as you can see in the slide, is to close the slip lanes for the through traffic at the intersection to improve safety and also to reduce speeding in the segment. Next slide. For the VFW Parkway segment, the short-term improvements are similar to those that we propose for the Providence Highway. To make it consistent, they include upgrading sidewalk and wheelchair ramps, also reducing travel lanes to create space to accommodate pedestrian and bicycles, and converting the 10-foot shoulder in each direction into separated bicycle lanes with physical barriers separating the bicycle lanes from vehicular traffic. Additional improvements for the short term include adding 3 bus stops in the segment shown in the yellow circles for the Route 52 bus service to serve the businesses and apartments within that segment, and adding signs to alert motorists of the presence of pedestrian and bicycles. Next slide. So this ends the short-term improvements. And again, I'm going to pause here and allow for your feedback and comments on the short-term improvements. Again, I will encourage you to use the chat functions and the raise hand feature to provide your comments.
And if I might just note, Christian, first, our intention, we would love to implement this long-term concept before the short-term, but realizing sometimes, and there's a lot of projects vying for only so much money for our roadway. Hopefully that will change in the coming years, but at least for now, we are cognizant that there are projects in the queue ahead of us and that it takes time to get to that money. And so we wanted to provide some short-term improvements that would go a long way. It won't revision or much like we've shown in the long term, but this is I think a good short-term approach. So thank you. I just want to add that in.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Seth. All right, so we do have some questions, so I'm going to go through those. And again, I'm going to try to get to everybody's question, but there are lots of really excellent thoughts in the chat. So if I'm not able to get to your question, just know that we are recording them and we will be reviewing them as well. So the first question, which I think is really a fabulous question, is how can residents who want to see these improvements fast-tracked best advocate for the funding to make it happen?
Great question. I'm happy to grab that. And I believe on the horn, we have some elected officials and their representatives tonight. And so much like they were able to secure this earmark and allow us to do this conceptual design that we're with you tonight, I believe directing any request to your elected officials is the best way to advocate to prioritize this project. The more they hear from you, the more they can build support and hopefully get this thing moving faster than we could otherwise. So please contact both Senator Rush, Representative McMurtry, who I believe is on the line, and Representative Ed Coppinger to ensure that this project maintains its priority and hopefully we can move this quicker through the gamut of roadway projects.
And Jeremy, I think there are a few questions about the Spring Street intersection, and I just was hoping you could restate what you said earlier about how that relates to this project.
Sure. As I said, that was that project actually got started, I believe, a couple years before this. I believe that got started in late about 2018, 2019, and they were doing what we call, I believe Seth referenced, is a 25% design, and that's an engineering standard for really, getting into the roadway, understanding all the constraints, surveying it, and coming up with a design that can be funded. And so that's what that process is with MassDOT. I can't speak to the community process to that, but I know speaking with MassDOT, and I think our friends from CTPS can allude that it is in the queue for funding, but it's later in 2020s. And I know speaking with MassDOT, who we've been working in concert with, this is a MassDOT roadway. And I will note that MassDOT, their priority is to ensure that this is still a major vehicular arterial. And they will advocate for that. And by no means are we looking to stop that. It will always be a major vehicular route, but we feel that there's room for everyone. But back to the intersection, as I said, it's a very difficult intersection. It's it's wide for reasons of trolleys and before there were cars. And unfortunately, it wasn't built for the vehicle traffic that we have today. And so they've had a difficult time trying to find a real big solution to reducing that congestion here. And what we've, as I alluded to tonight, I think us coming in from the south on this corridor and looking at some of these stoplights can probably have a big change to the queuing that's going on at this Spring Street intersection. That's really backing up some of the points of contact for vehicles and pedestrians and all the like. So we're going to work together. I think this will probably hopefully bring some optimism to Mass DOT that this might help alleviate some of the issues that they've come up against, and we can work together, and hopefully this can all be one project because it kind of all works together.
Awesome, thanks, Jeremy. So our next question is about the short-term bike lanes, and specifically wondering if there's going to be a physical barrier between the bike lanes and the car lanes in the short-term recommendations.
Yeah, Christian, if you can show them one of the slides. I have okay.
Is that a good?
And now go to maybe Providence Highway. Yeah. So as you can see, between the vehicles and the bike lane, we have a physical barrier. It can be a JC barrier or an equivalent to separate bicycles from the vehicular travel lanes. We did this because it's a high-speed lane, and it's required to separate pedestrian bicycles from the travel lanes to improve safety and also to encourage people to use the bike lane. So there is a physical barrier for all the bike lanes in this short-term improvement.
Great, thank you, Seth. So I think there's been a couple of other questions that dovetail on some that we discussed in the long-term solutions, but some folks were wondering whether traffic calming, what the impact of traffic calming will be on congestion, and feeling like traffic calming might actually just add to congestion. So Seth, if you could speak a little bit to the impact of that, that would be great.
Yeah, actually, one of the problems we identified in the corridor is high speed within the corridor, and also a lot of crashes. There was one fatality that happened at the Marine Rotary. So throughout the design of the concept, we were aiming to improve safety in every way. And by doing so, the concept that we have were designed in such a way to narrow the roadway and also implement a more signalized intersection to reduce speeds. But none of these concepts is going to invite more traffic or create congestion within the corridor. It's just to slow down the vehicular traffic to about 30 or 35 miles per hour in the corridor, which will be safer for pedestrians and bicycles.
Christian, can I
Yes,
address? I
please.
saw a question in there, asking, what are we looking to get from folks from this? And of course, we want to present these concepts to you and see what you thought. And in the end, this final report will probably have all these concepts in there, and it will, each one will talk about which ones seem to be more supportive. And I think we've clearly heard some direction on what folks like about these recommendations, some more than others. Like we talked about Marine Rotary. We have two concepts, but one, the Rotary doesn't really work when it comes to doing an analysis and a number of other aspects. And then we talked about some of the long-term improvements and different concepts. I think we heard that at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christian, a lot of the second concepts, which provided more buffer, seemed to be a preferred one. And
Yes.
we're taking all these comments, and these are all going into our spreadsheet, and this will be part of our final report of what we thought we heard from the community as a preferred concept. Both of these will be in there for the next phase. As we said, this isn't, setting it in stone. It's really funneling our vision for what we want to see for the next phase, where we will really hammer home what it's actually going to look like. This is to, get feedback on where we think we want to go based on your feedback.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. And just to give you a sort of peek behind the curtain, as it were, all of the feedback that we gathered through the breakout rooms in the last forum and also in the chat were put into a large document and analyzed and coded to look for themes and trends. So that is one of the ways in which we took the comments that everybody was giving us and tried to understand what the consensus from those were. And I would imagine that we'll use this chat in the same way.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Jeremy and Christian, that we will be taking all your comments and any that you might have beyond just the chat comments that are provided here tonight, that we'll trying to be able to include those in the appendix of the report we're going to be putting together. That way, your comments, your concerns, and everything are documented, and that'll be there in place that when this project hopefully moves to the next steps, the people that will be looking at that will also know what you're thinking of ahead of time, so they can be aware of what your thoughts and concerns are.
Great, thank you both. So there was one question about, I think there was a lot of back and forth in the chat about this, but there's one question that was generally about what the purpose of doing, I think, bike and pedestrian improvements on some parts of the roadway and not on others, if the other parts of the roadway are still hostile towards bikes and pedestrians. I think this was specifically about some of the short-term concepts about improving the bike and pedestrian experience in some places and not in others, and potentially including areas outside of the scope of this project. So
I'll try to answer that.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things when we're looking at making bike and pedestrian improvements, not only in this corner, but all corridors that we look in our MPO region, is that if we try to make improvements, we're not going to be able to make all improvements all at once on every single roadway and corridor that we look at. So unfortunately, we look at it piece by piece. And in this instance, we're looking at the Providence Highway VFW Parkway piece of the long-term vision of having a bikeable corridor where you could go from Spring Street or from the Boston all the way down to, I think someone mentioned Legacy Place and Dedham Center in the chat. So, those are kind of long-term goals, is making this segment bikeable and walkable. So hopefully that you can move on to the next segment, make those bikeable and walkable also.
Okay, thank you.
Christian, if I may, I did see a couple points about, land, and as you notice, I mean, there was a lot of land that was taken to build this roadway back in the 50s, and more so, I'd say probably actually along the Dedham, especially the Dedham stretch and the Marine Rotary, there's potential for land actually coming being available. And, not sure what that means by being available. Means it's not going to be a roadway now. There's potential. It could be green space. It could be used for development, and anything else in between. That's still to be determined, but you can see there's some reclamation of what used to be asphalt, and especially along this long stretch to be green space. And so I just want to, folks, we're not, I think as far as this goes, there's no planning on, taking anyone's land. I think in the anything, it'll probably be reverse. Boston, that one's probably a bit more constrained as that roadway isn't quite as wide, but we still feel that there's enough roadway width to do the programming that we've discussed tonight. So yeah, we're not planning on any land takings. And as I said, there'll hopefully be less asphalt through this process. And I think we'd all agree is better for the environment. And there's probably, too much today. So I think there's reclamation of that. That's a huge benefit.
Awesome, thank you. So earlier in the long-term presentation, and then again in this presentation, there was a question about eliminating the shoulder, and concerned that doing that would make it dangerous to exit the roadway to businesses. So this is a two-parter, I guess, but first, would one of you be able to address whether or not, what the impact of eliminating the shoulder would be in terms of travel safety? And then another person asked in the chat if there were other examples of projects that you could point the community to where that has been successful.
Okay. We are not taking the shoulder. We are just using it to accommodate pedestrian and bicycles. That is what we have in the short-term improvement, provide accommodation for bicycles. In the long-term improvement, the concepts that do not have shoulder kind of calms traffic and also provides more space to separate pedestrian and bicycles from the travel lanes. So this is how the concept development came up. It's just that in the short-term improvement, we took the shoulder in order to be able to provide accommodation for bicycles.
Awesome, thank you, Seth. We did get one question about the timeline for the short-term improvements. Do they still need to go through additional design process? Could they proceed as you have them here? What would be the general timeline, the potential timeline for any of those improvements?
I'll let Mark and Seth handle that one, if you guys don't mind.
Okay, so the short-term improvement, some may go through a little bit design, but not as complex as for the long term. Many of them can be done through maintenance funds from MassDOT. So I think it's something that we'll be discussing with MassDOT and providing more information about how the short-term improvements are going to be handled. And we provide all this information in the final report.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth. All right. So I'm just looking to make sure that to see which questions I've missed, which I'm sure there are some. So in relation to the shoulder question, there was another question in the chat about the speed that people are traveling when it comes to yielding for cars that are turning. And that, I think, was the person's main concern with in terms of safety. So if the speeds are going to be, I know you mentioned earlier, Seth, that speeds will be reduced, but if folks are traveling at 40 miles per hour on the corridor, will it still be safe to have the shoulder be used for other things other than turning?
For the short-term improvements, as you have seen, there is currently no safe way to bicycle through the corridor. And providing accommodation for bicycles is very important because many people wanted to bike to go and shop and also to recreational areas. So taking away the shoulder was just to provide accommodation for pedestrian, for bicycles. And also remember that to keep the bicycles safe, you have to provide them also with a barrier because of the high speed. But one additional benefit of not having the shoulder is to narrow the roadway, and that is the result of also calming traffic, reducing the speed. So this is what helps much, that we can use the shoulder for bicycles and also use it, also take it away to reduce people from speeding or using it to bypass traffic.
And so it sounds like, Seth, what you're saying is that eliminating the shoulder for traffic car use is a traffic calming measure, and so it will help to reduce the speed of cars traveling on the corridor, which in turn reduces the risk of accidents because of rear-ending or something like that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and also using the shoulder prevents us from taking lands to provide for bicycle accommodation in the short term.
So Seth, there's been a couple of questions about the bicycle lane buffers that you mentioned earlier. Can you describe what the buffer might be made out of? Will they be flex posts, or will they be a concrete barrier or something else?
Okay, so we mentioned that there should be a buffer between the bicycle lane and the vehicular travel lane, and this is essential because of safety. It can be a jersey barrier or some kind of jersey barrier, but that option is left to MassDOT to decide the equivalent, the right kind of barrier, physical barrier, to separate the vehicular lanes from the travel lanes. This doesn't have to be specifically designed or mentioned in the concept, but it's something that has to be provided. And the kind of physical barrier will be determined by MassDOT.
Yeah, and I just want to add to Seth's comment there that more than likely, because of the speeds and the width of the corridor and the two lanes, that it wouldn't be a flex post barrier. Those are too easy to cross into the bike lanes. So we wouldn't be recommending a flex post in this location.
Wonderful, thank you both. So we have about 5 minutes left. I think that gives us time for one more question. So I'm just gonna try to make sure that I haven't missed any major questions. Lots of, again, really fabulous comments in the chat about the concepts that you have presented today.
And I want to thank everyone for keeping it civil in the chat. And we're talking about transportation, and there's always a lot of opinions. And so I appreciate everyone for coming together and listening to everyone. And thankfully we haven't had to moderate at all. So thank you, everyone.
So I think the last thing is more of a clarification, and I know, Jeremy, you mentioned this at the beginning or at the beginning of the Q&A, but just to clarify, at the moment there were some questions about a taking happening in the corridor, and if I recall, your clarification was that that is not something that you expect to happen.
No, and maybe I stirred the pot when I talked about the Town of Dedham acquired land. That was actually a gift, what is otherwise undevelopable land. So, but along the corridor, we don't have any planned takings as of yet. And obviously, when we get to 25% design, which is the next phase, we'll look, we'll really get into, the land and how much is open for this project. It appears that there's an abundance of a roadway that we've talked about that will meet all of our needs, and that no land takings are likely going to need to happen. And it's actually counter to that, that there's going to be more available land, and how that's used to be determined, especially when I talk about like the Marine Rotary. We can see along the Providence Highway, you can see our conceptual iterations is turning that what we call that side travel lane, carriage road, call it what you want, into green space. So I hope that clarifies that.
All right, so I think we only have about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy for some next steps.
Thank you, Christian. So again, everyone, thank you. And this process isn't done, and you've built a lot of momentum by yourselves, and it's one thing for us to have these meetings, but you've turned out in great numbers. You've turned out in great numbers for the survey. And I want to make sure that all that effort and all that desire to see a new vision from this corridor keeps going. And so we'll be accepting comments until July 14th on what we've seen. So please tell your friends. We're happy to hear good, bad, everything in between. These are concepts, and we're happy to hear from folks that might not have had a say. So you can I'd say if you want to pick one of the 4, you can close your eyes and pick one. But if you want to contact one, I'm fine. You can email me and I will share it with the team. Maybe because I'm at the top, but by no means, you can pick and choose whoever you want to contact, but we all share it together. Please, so that will be open till July 14th. We will complete the final report and these recommendations that you heard tonight by the end of August. And thankfully, through this registration process, we have all your contact information. So you will get an email from us when that is released. And again, this is this is the first step. We have another phase to go. And so in between, we'll be talking about exploring the feasibility of additional recreation opportunities. Like I mentioned, I'm working on securing funding to unlock some of that. In addition to what you've seen tonight, let's see what else we can do. There appears to be room to provide more accommodations for passive recreation, and who knows, maybe even some canoeing amenities. But let's keep that conversation going. So that will continue. And lastly, contact your local officials. We need their support and their advocacy at the state and eventually at the federal level to secure funding to continue this going. Like I said, there's been a wealth of community participation thus far, and I'm sure that sea of participation can turn into, hopefully expediting this project a bit. And especially, I'd love to jump over doing short-term improvements and actually implement the long-term improvements, because that's the real change. Short-term improvements, we're trying to fix, a roadway from the 50s. That's not an easy thing, and it's not going to be perfect. And let's do it right. So please contact your elected officials, Senator Rush, Representative Paul McMurtry, and Representative Ed Coppinger. Those are your point people. Those are the folks that can secure us the big money. And we both at the Town of Dedham and City of Boston will continue to advocate for advancing this process. And I'm sure we'll continue down this road. And with that, so thank you all, and stormy night, and I'm glad we didn't have a meeting outside tonight. Not that would have been bad, but so thank you for taking time out tonight and joining us. Please stay in touch. We want to hear all your feedback, good, bad, and if you have anything else to share. And so thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.